Scrooge's Christmas Carol, Releasing the Last Chain. Written and illustrated by C. Pippin Lowe. Stave 3. Caught, then controlled. Before Scrooge could deliver a word, Marley snatched him from 1813. Scrooge sighed a faint protest, yet allowed his distressed friend to pull him from the prison. The fierce speed of Marley's departure caused Scrooge to brace against his friend's thrust of motion. As Marley rushed toward the future, an outburst of activity accelerated London's change. Burlington Arcade reappeared between blinks. The rapid change of buildings rising while others fell gave London the illusion of breathing. Marley only slowed when smoke swamped the sky. He was unaffected by the billowing cinders, yet Scrooge, while tearing up from the smoke, nearly suffocated from the ash. Hacking every syllable, he asked, "Jacob, what is happening?" "Covent Garden Theatre is burning." "Burning? That happened 50 years ago." Abruptly, Marley stopped. Suspended over London, they each looked at the other. Scrooge continued to cough. Then, without warning, Jacob grabbed Ebenezer's arm and shot the two of them straight up out of the toxic cloud. Scrooge cleared his throat, then asked, "Have you taken us further in the past?" Marley searched every direction in hopes of discovering a landmark that would identify the time period, while Scrooge watched silently. Then, without warning, Marley shouted, "Over there!" He pointed across the Thames. "The Crystal Palace has already been moved to Sydenham Hill." "So, we must be in the present," said Scrooge. "The palace? Why, it was only moved a couple of years ago." "It looks like the building has been there several years." "No, how can that be?" "Look around the building, Ebenezer. The trees have grown quite tall. That doesn't happen in a couple of years." Scrooge studied the building's grounds, then said, "I think you may be right." "I overshot the time period," said Marley, more to himself than to Scrooge. "We can get back, right? This is not supposed to happen. But we can get back, right?" Marley did not answer. Instead, his thoughts focused on trying to understand their predicament. Could he actually have propelled them past 1854? "We can find the date on a newspaper," suggested Scrooge. Again, Marley did not answer. He remained a quarter-mile above the city, closed his eyes, then fixated on his inner place of contemplation. As if a hatch had opened, Scrooge plunged toward gravity's pull. "Marley!" Marley stiffened, causing Scrooge to plummet. Though he continued screaming, Scrooge knew Marley was caught in his own silent world. His race downward gathered speed until he heard his mother's voice say, "Finally, I will be able to hold my baby boy." The words drained his fear. As he dropped, the city's sounds became noticeable. Though he would not look down, he felt the earth's frozen fingers reaching up. Oddly, he was ready to finally be caressed by the parent he knew loved him, one who gave her life for him, yet still remained devoted in spirit. So, Ebenezer closed his eyes for the inevitable. Expecting his his actual life, would soon lie pulverized upon London's cobblestones, Scrooge calmed all his muscles. As his spirit succumbed to relaxation, a force beyond him grabbed his arm. Startled, he looked skyward for identification. Swaying in the breeze was a black cape. As the cloth continued to flap, Ebenezer identified the bones of a skeleton beneath the cloak, and he screamed. Dangling at the mercy of the ghost of Christmas yet to come, Scrooge asked, "Am I dead?" The spectre only began moving upward. Terrorized, Scrooge started twisting. Though he hoped for freedom from the apparition, the spectre only gripped his coat tighter. Once even with Marley, the ghost of Christmas yet to come hurled Scrooge into his friend's rigid spirit. Marley barely flinched. As Scrooge drew his next breath, the spectre again pushed him into Marley. Repeatedly, the black-cloaked ghost forced the living into the dead. Scrooge protested, but it did no good. The spectre propelled them together so often and so forcefully that Marley finally became alert. The fog within Marley quickly moved from confusion toward panic. "This spectre will destroy you," he warned Ebenezer. "Don't let his bones touch your skin." The spectre kept thrusting the two together. The abuse was continuous, yet neither man understood the spook's motivation. Finally, Scrooge grabbed hold of Marley's sleeve and yelled, "Stop him, Jacob!" Instantly, the spectre whisked the pair back to 1854. Then, Scrooge again surrendered to gravity, dropping several feet. Upon impact, his knees buckled to the ground. Marley put his arms under Scrooge's shoulders and lifted him to his feet. "Is there any injury?" he asked. "I think I was destined to lie upon the cobblestones today." Marley looked at his friend with a questioning eye, but only said, "The ghost of Christmas yet to come has spared us." "Again," replied Scrooge. Marley had no idea what his friend meant, but assumed it was not important, so he continued his task of taking Ebenezer home. As they neared Scrooge's door, Marley's chest began to glow orange, grow hot, and heave outward. Beneath the ghost's iridescent skin, Scrooge witnessed his friend's single chain pulsate with each pumping of his heart. Each beat from the dead muscle brought a thrust of molten metal to the surface of the chain. "I'm on fire!" screamed Marley. "I'm burning up!" As steam escaped his forehead, new shackles began to form around the heart's chain. Together they watched as a second and third link attached itself to the metal ring. But it wasn't until the fourth link pierced Marley's skin that Scrooge yelled, "Jacob, we must return. You are under attack." "The risk is too great." "Our bravery will be powerful," Ebenezer insisted. "We must, for I fear for your—" As his voice floated away, he focused on Marley's face. The agony of the new chains caused Marley to wince as he agreed. Slowly, they began moving to the past. 1844 passed, then 1834, and when 1829 moved to 28, the newest of Marley's chains disappeared. Once they settled into 1813, the third chain disappeared. As they neared the prison, only 2 links remained attached to Marley's heart. Though they did create an added drag, Marley quickly adapted to the burden. The day, December 28th, had the thickest fog in London's blurry history. Newgate prison was nearly hidden by a soupy mixture of mist and fireplace exhaust. As the two approached Noah's cell, they watched as a stagecoach hit a wagon full of firewood. Throughout the city, the sound of crashes, slides, and abrupt stops filled the air, while often the visuals were unavailable to the travellers. As they entered the room of prisoners, a murkiness lingered in the air. Even with the haze, Marley and Scrooge could see the trouble overwhelming the room, and Noah was in the middle of it. Most of the inmates watched from the edges, as did the turnkey, while Simons manhandled a young boy not yet a dozen years of age. "You owe me this," said Simons, as he grabbed the hat from the boy's head. "It's mine," cried Henry. He put up quite a struggle, but was no match for the thug. That is, until Noah came to the boy's aid. "This boy is my property," said Noah. "You can't own a person." "And yet I do," insisted Noah. "Now release my property." Henry looked at Noah and opened his mouth to speak, but Noah quieted him with a fierce look. "Sure, I will release him, but the act is mine." "No, it ain't," said Dee, the dark-skinned woman, as she clobbered the thief with a piece of firewood. At her feet lay the good-for-nothing, out cold. Henry picked up his hat and bowed to both Noah and Dee. "Thank you, Governor. I owe you both." In unison, both adults welcomed the boy. "You stay with us until your parents claim you." "Then I will be with you forever," Henry commented. Noah looked at the orphan and asked, "Do you think forever is long enough?" The three smiled, then moved away from Simon's unconscious body. While the criminal lay helpless, others pilfered his possessions. By the time Simons regained consciousness, barely his underclothes were left. He stormed with indignation. Vowing revenge, he moved toward the heat of the open fire, and there he stayed. At the opposite side of the room, Noah gathered with Dee, Henry, and two other friends, Martha and Joseph. "Why are you here?" Noah asked Henry. "Joseph knows," he said, looking at the gangly boy towering above him. "He's my apprentice," said Joseph. "It appears he has missed a few of your lessons." Noah smiled at his sarcasm, but then realized prison had already changed his mindset, for he would never have made such a flippant comment about criminality a mere 2 days earlier. The rest of the evening passed without incident. As sleep is never readily available in prison, that evening Noah surprised even himself when he released his fear of being attacked by the killers near him and dropped into a long, overdue rest. With the light of dawn, the day as usual brought the men from the sleeping dungeon to the day room. The only difference was the lack of women. Noah figured they were just late, but they never arrived that day. When asked, the turnkey just said, "It is none of your business." Without them, the room cast an aggressive gloom over the day. Petty fights sprang up throughout the cycle of hours. Noah kept the boys and himself out of the fray. The only other men quiet that day were the three that had been huddling together since Noah's arrival. Their self-imposed isolation seemed normal. No one had ever been curious about them, so once again they silently clung to their own aloof world. On that Wednesday, Noah expected no visitors. He'd almost decided to forego the trip to the exercise yard, where family and friends were allowed to contact inmates. However, the desire to clear the sorrow of his arrest sent Noah into the day's frozen air. He hoped the crispy breeze would lift his spirits, but had no idea just how profoundly his desire would materialize. Cold air assaulted his face. The shock of the wind's force brought tears to the corners of his eyes. As he compelled himself to face the weather, his thoughts turned to analyzing the events of his demise. Yet, Noah would never come to the correct conclusion. His mind was not capable of imagining that Jacob caused his tragedy. It would take the collapse of Noah's character for him to even approach the truth. Nonetheless, as he circled the yard, his tension began to ease, at least until his visitor arrived. As Noah rounded the circle inmates walked for exercise, his stride ceased upon the discovery of Flora standing at the visitor's cage. She stood there, in silence, watching him. Internally, Noah fumed that Flora had gone against his wishes. Externally, he was thrilled at the sight of her. "Why are you here?" he demanded. "Because you are my husband, and you should not have to suffer this matter. and yet I do, willingly," she then added. "I bring you news. Good news? No, just news. Your trial has been scheduled for 2 weeks from today." "Has Jacob found a barrister for me?" "All of them want a large deposit. I am determined to find the funds." Noah looked at her with tenderness. It was at that moment that Noah realized representation at his trial would probably not be available. So he brought forth his favorite subject, his wife. "I wish you had not come." Looking away, he added, "I did not want you to see me this way." "You cannot shelter me from this, though I wish I could," he mumbled to himself, then spoke to Flora. "Your smile lifts me." "I miss you starting the morning fire while I lay toasty beneath the covers," she teased. "And I miss being able to slide between those same sheets after you have warmed them before bed." Though the boundary of bars interrupted their full embrace, each reached through to the other's hand. Interweaving fingers grasped a passionate squeeze. As they lingered in each other's hold, Noah began to feel a solid object in his grip. Looking into Flora's eyes, Noah acknowledged the presence of the mass. Rolling their hands together, both felt the item pivoting between them. Flora tugged at his grasp, but he resisted. For him, the feel of her soothed his sorrow, so he would allow no substance of matter to break her touch. It was only at the urging of the turnkey's too close policy that Noah released his clutch. Only then did he identify the quartz crystal her grandfather had brought her from Switzerland. It was his last gift to her before his passing, so the shock of it now being in his possession caused him concern. "What is this?" He looked at the glass-like gemstone. He, of course, had seen the stone every day of their marriage resting atop Flora's dresser. The stone was special, even in the world of quartz, for at its center stood the phantom of a younger crystal. Covering the inner point of the crystal blanketed a black powdery mineral. "We are this crystal, 2 in 1, she explained. "I cannot take your grandfather's. This is my crystal, Noah. Besides, when Grandpa gave this to me, he said the day would come when I would feel an obligation to pass the stone to a loved one in need. He told me the love of 2 is contained within this one stone." "Should I do anything special with it?" he asked. "With this stone, my strength is yours to use whenever it is needed." "My dear sweet Flora, thank you." "Ebenezer, come take a good look at this thing," requested Marley. As each stood on either side of Noah, they admired the stone's qualities. "Well, that is amazing. It appears that a scattering of chimney soot settled on the tip, about halfway through its growth," said Scrooge. "Yes, and it's perfectly formed, too." Even though the turnkey had continued to watch Noah and Flora for the violation of extreme affection, they stayed within each other's touch. After a fair amount of time, the turnkey yelled the demand that all inmates return to the day room. Noah ignored the cry out from the jailer. Instead, Noah lifted Flora's hand to his lips. As he kissed the back of her fingers, a hawk began to circle just a few feet above their heads. Surprised by the bird's willingness to suffer the cold, Noah looked up, then told Flora, "We will soar again." The guard grabbed Noah by the shoulder and yanked him from Flora's touch. Angrily, he said, "Listen to me, convict. When I talk, you react. Do not ever ignore me again. Now move." With that, Noah began walking toward the building. The rage of the turnkey was a minor price to pay for his brightened spirit. He did not look back at Flora. The fear of sobs forced his eyes forward. That day, Noah willingly paid the penny to the jailer for being the last inside. "Tell me something, Jacob," said Scrooge. "What is your request?" "Do you already know everything that has or is about to happen?" "No, I only have the knowledge of my living experiences." "So, you did not know about the crystal?" "That is right. Truth be known, I did not even know that Flora had visited Noah," explained Marley. Ebenezer asked, "So, we are here to change the outcome of the trial?" "No, that is not possible. We are here to get a full understanding of the tragedy." "What are we going to eventually change?" "Noah's misery." That left Scrooge speechless. He paused in thought, then cautiously asked, "I had actually figured that out, but how—" Scrooge did not know how to phrase the question so more information could be gained, and Marley was no help. His friend just looked away from him, then started moving toward the next day. The wintry mix of cold and fog began the day of Noah's arrest. And now, 5 days later, the weather had turned to the extreme. London was not used to days of below-zero temperatures. Inside Newgate, the only thing that changed from the bitter cold to the ferociously frigid was that the inmates pushed the community table as close to the fire as possible. Most of the inmates sat around the fire that day. They had to survive. Getting along was another issue. Everybody in the room knew to avoid both Maxie and Simons. On that Thursday, actions to avoid any one person proved to be ambitious. All were trapped. Noah and his group clustered at the table, as did most everyone else. The 3 reclusive men sat at the fire's edge. They continued to evade the other inmates. However, the shunning was mutual, as the rumor had traveled around the room that these 3 were spies against the other prisoners. The day brought nothing of worth to the room. Each prisoner suffered their own personal agony. Attempts to lighten the mood through humor or stories did little to lessen the collective torment. "Why is that man lying on the floor?" asked Henry. "Stay away from him, he's been bitten by a rat," explained Noah. "Does he have rabies?" "Maxie or Simons would have murdered him by now," replied Martha. "So what is wrong with him?" "Gaol-fever. He is a dead man. Just ain't stopped breathing yet," said Dee. "Why is no one helping him?" "Henry, you are a curious one," said Joseph. "It may not be as contagious as rabies, but gaol-fever still kills those it infects," said Noah. "I want to help him." "Look, Henry, no one wants you to get sick. Also, he is different from us." "He looks the same. Besides, Dee's different too. She's both a woman and black. So what is different about Levi?" "His religion," said Martha. "Oh," Henry nodded with understanding, and not another word on the subject was spoken. "So, Martha, what is your story?" "Some luck, some misfortune, but mostly just work in the streets." "That sounds like a tragedy." "The hardship is I'm getting released soon, and you are all staying." An uncomfortable pause caused Noah to change the subject. "So, tell me, Henry, where is your family?" asked Noah. "Joseph is my—" In rapid response, the group chimed in. "Instructor, master, owner." "No, he is my cousin," explained Joseph. "And what about becoming a pickpocket?" "Necessity. We lost most of our family in a boating accident. Gotta eat," Joseph added. "Besides, Henry tricked me." "I did not. It is not my fault I am a better lifter than you," bragged Henry. What are you talking about? Dee asked.
Last year, after the funerals, I was training Henry in the art of grabbing the gold when the little fiend handed me my wallet after the lesson.
The other three laughed, slapped the table with approval, and then declared Henry the smarter of the two. They chatted throughout the afternoon. All forms of topics were raised as each told their story, but one subject stood out: slavery.
Dee, tell me how an American black woman made it to England, Joseph inquired.
I had help from my slave owner.
What did they do? Put you on the ship?
They did, but without the goal of my escaping once in Great Britain.
So you were a runaway?
I am free.
I want to go to America. Do you miss it? Queried Joseph.
The sin of bondage may never be washed from that land. It holds no benefit for me.
What happens if Old Bailey sends you back?
The courts own me now, so they can have their will. But let me tell you this, I will always escape the master's chains.
Blessed be, replied Martha.
Blessed be, repeated Scrooge. Though the end of daylight usually brings a night of dreading the sleeping dungeon, this evening brought a peaceful rest, at least until the hint of light. As a shadowy dawn lingered, several turnkeys stormed the dungeon.
All of you bums, stand in a row.
Stunned by the intensity of the demand, every prisoner looked at the guards, yet waited to act. Each of the jailers held as many sets of leg irons as they could carry.
You will get up now, screamed the guard.
You have a minute. Anyone not in line stays in the sleeping room, roared another. All of the men scrambled to their feet. That minute passed in seconds as every convict rushed to obey. Stand with your feet apart, instructed a turnkey. The men did the unavoidable. Each allowed a prison guard to lock their legs together. With the weight of shackles clanking, Henry asked his cousin, "Why is this happening?"
Bloody quiet,
shouted the overseer. It was Martha in the day room who informed the men the reason all were wearing leg cuffs. The three elusive spies turned out to be jailbreakers.
They were quiet about it, but I heard them break through the roof.
How did you hear that when your sleeping room is also in the dungeon?
See that bloke?
Martha pointed to the heaviest of the two guards.
I fixed the bulge in his pants last night.
All but Henry understood. Why would you fix his pants? He asked. Martha just ignored the question and continued.
I even helped the three.
How? Asked Joseph.
As that creep stumbled through pokes at me, I turned him so he faced away from the window. Then I watched the three drop a makeshift rope between the prison and College of Physicians.
And the guard had no idea.
He was a little busy at the time, quipped Martha.
Why does a woman betray herself? Asked Scrooge. No, Ebenezer, the laws forsake women, replied Marley. There is nothing forcing Martha, insisted Scrooge. How about the desire for release from Newgate? Why is that important? Ebenezer, nobody wants to be in prison. The only reason Martha has not already been released is because she does not have the 2p to pay her liberation fee, explained Marley. Is there no other way to get the money? Not for her. You tell me, Ebenezer, what right to ownership or even to a modest living does she have? Marley waited for a reply, but the answer was understood, so Ebenezer remained silent. Right around dusk, the day room's massive door swung open. At the threshold stood two of the turnkeys carrying a limp man. A hangman's bag covered his drooping head, while leg and wrist irons prevented resistance. Without ceremony, the guards threw the man to the floor, then left. Few of the other prisoners showed any interest in the unconscious man. However, Henry insisted on helping. With care, he approached the fellow. In order to prevent injury to Henry, his 4 companions stood near him as he lifted the bag from the senseless man's head. Although Henry showed surprise at the individual's unmasking, the others did not. Heaped on the floor was one of the 3 prison breakers. As soon as Martha, Dee, and Noah identified the man, they returned to the community table. Joseph stayed to assist Henry in the needs of the escapee. The man's entire head was swollen. Henry hoped the man would not regain his mind until the bruising in his eyes decreased. Together, the 2 boys dragged the jailbreaker to the fireplace. They placed him near the dying Levi. Slowly, the man started to groan. Once the boys joined the community table, Dee told them, "I would give y'all a grog if I had it." "Yeah, I'd be celebrating big today," agreed Martha. "And not just with grog. New Year's Day deserves the good stuff. But I bet there's not a pence among us, right?" As Martha half waited for an answer, Noah began to realize the truth that 1814 had arrived. Christmas was in the rear but 1 week, and yet a lifetime of frights had occurred within those 7 days. The others remained in conversation, while Noah drifted into reflection. The upending of his fate created confusion. He wondered why a loving God would do such a thing to not only him, but to any person. What loving purpose could there be in such treachery? And yet, he prayed with all of his heart that Jesus would protect Flora, and he believed God's Son could. He did not want to feel sorry for himself, so when anger pierced his thoughts, he pushed away from the table and walked to the double-grated window. Dazed by the opening's chill, Noah immediately retreated to the heat. Standing alone, he struggled to contain his rage, and then, when he realized his future could no longer be shaped by his plans, he released tears. Sorrow and anger merged into one. Marley waved Scrooge off as he stood next to his brother. From across the room, Scrooge heard Marley howl as he openly grieved for Noah's hardship. Only Levi among the living heard the yowls from the spirit. As Levi began to shake from the noise, Marley said, "Wish I could change this for you." Looking into Noah's reddened eyes, Marley continued, "I pledge this to you, Noah. I will help your soul recover from the pain of this life spirit, or my own spirit and soul will I surrender in replacement of yours." The guilt coming from Marley had the opposite effect on Noah, for tears turned into sobs. As Noah jerked his body in an effort to control the weeping, Marley put his arm across his brother's shoulder. "Noah, remember Grandmama's story about the caterpillar?" He paused to give Noah the normal response time after a question, then continued. "The caterpillar is born with one goal, to crawl around the plant world, eating as much of it as is possible before the worm's end." Marley breathed in the frosty air, then said, "Oddly, the caterpillar is not even aware of its true purpose. It just transforms. To the worm within this creature, life is over after its massive devouring. The caterpillar is saddened by its coming end, for eating is its life. Yet the Creator knows the beast's true purpose. The transformation always planned for the animal is the creature's destination." Marley paused, planned his next words carefully, then said, "Your soul knows of your coming transformation. I can tell you to be calm, and yet I know not when you will be delivered from this horror. As the worm has no idea, it will become the most beautiful example of nature. so we as humans have no idea of our perfect essence either. We just become fully functional through our spirit's plan." Pausing, Marley finished, "Most humans are not aware of their journey's objective, and yet even through the unknowing, we often do great things. Noah, you should know that though your life has ended, your future is moving forward." As Noah, along with the other males, returned to the sleeping dungeon, Joseph asked, "Can I help you?" Noah swiped his eyes with his sleeve as he continued in silence. Light left the day, and then, in the darkness of sleep, Noah's torment finally dwindled. That evening, as the turnkey closed the door to the day room, he made a note of the need to remove Levi. With another day came another prisoner return. The day was a Sunday, so the prison's only organized event was church, and all were required to attend. The ordinary barked a fierce service at the captive audience. Passages of hell for all in attendance seemed to be the theme of the sermon. As the ceremony ended, Noah promptly forgot every word spoken. Back in the day room, the returning prisoners were greeted with the groans of a man lying at the center of the room. As the prisoners shuffled their chained feet past the disoriented heap, the previously returned prisoner recognized the form on the floor and attacked. It all happened quickly, and not one being had the instinct to stop the assault. They just watched in alarm as the first prisoner assailed the second. "You turncoat!" yelled the first prisoner. "I had to," complained the newly returned man. The first man stopped the second from completing his thought. Instead, he wrapped the chains of his wrist shackles around the seated man's neck and pulled up as hard as he could. Lifting the man several inches off the floor, the entire room heard the cracking of the bones in his neck. With a hard thump, the attacker set the prey back on the floor where he just remained, unmoving. As the room looked on in bewilderment, they realized the man was dead. It all could not have happened faster. Even a bullet would not have been as abrupt. All of the children and many of the women in the room began to scream. The murdered man sat frozen with the weight of his head being pulled downward by his ruined neck. Oddly, he looked like a turtle with bulging eyes, drooping mouth, and a large pointy nose. No one cared that the man was lifeless. The room of prisoners only feared the punishment that was likely to be administered to them. Before the men in the group could confront the killer, 2 turnkeys entered the room swinging batons. "All right, swine, back away," said one of the guards to the room of people. Pushing through to the corpse, the officer placed his hand on the deceased man's shoulder. Promptly, he fell over. The turnkeys demanded the group send forth the killer. Wishing to keep themselves safe from retaliation, every person, even Noah, pointed to the perpetrator. As the guards secured the murderer, 2 new turnkeys entered the room and carried the corpse away. None of the turnkeys desired to discipline the others, so the crisis went the way of the day and faded with the light. Marley's spirit wondered if the young Jacob had missed his calling in life. He had always been masterful at the business of business. However, the counting house was never his passion. It was just his livelihood. And now, as Marley watched the attention his younger self delivered to his horses, he knew he would have been more useful to society as a stable hand than a money grubber. Yet, that was in the past, and he was here for the future. Scrooge and Marley watched as young Jacob brushed, fed, and loved the horses. Pampering his beasts comforted the guilt of his betrayal of Noah. As his brother suffered in a cage, he played horseman with his twins, Smoke and Shadow. He had always owned the pair of thoroughbred horses, for he had given the muscle of his youth to the stables. Originally, the deal made was that Jacob worked without pay until his foal was born. At that time, he would own the horse, yet continued to work for the animal's food and housing. This arrangement turned out to be a first-rate transaction for Jacob, for when the twins were born, the stable owner gave the ambitious boy both colts. After grooming the pair, Jacob put his forehead to Smoke's brow and said, "I have dishonored myself beyond repair. You, my friends, are my only hope of regaining a righteous path." Stroking each horse equally, he added, "Let's play with what little time we have left." In the next breath, Jacob mounted one of the steeds, then began galloping through the open field. He darted in and out as the horse made every effort to oblige his direction. The painful weather conditions led to the shortening of their ride. Could it get colder? Jacob wondered as he put away the riding equipment. After giving both colts their normal feed, he presented each with half a frozen apple. As they chomped the fruit into mush, Jacob made his way to Newgate. While he walked, Jacob figured out a method for liberating Noah. He should have acted immediately upon his brother's arrest, but the fear for his own safety caused him to cower. It would have been simple to return the money within a day. Noah himself had provided an explanation with his spills on the ice. Even the most suspicious constable could see the rationale in a story that the money fell out of the bag. However, that is not what he did. Instead, Jacob allowed the situation to fester into a nightmare. Smoke and Shadow were Jacob's only assets. The decision to sell the horses labored in Jacob's mind for days. He resented the idea of having to suffer any personal loss, yet he realized the situation would only improve if he surrendered his cherished colts. Jacob knew that selling one horse would bring enough money to pay back both Pressy and the jail costs. He contemplated keeping Shadow, but that was not fixed in thought. Both horses had provided the same playfulness and friendship to him. Smoke was ornery, with his ability to open up gates. Shadow, on the other hand, had a passion for running under branches in the hopes of throwing the rider. But it was the event of both horses working together to save Jacob's life that made the final impression on his decision. He remembered the day the horses kept him in the center while 3 coyotes circled him. The first coyote moved left, then Shadow moved left for the block. A second pushed right as Smoke countered the move with a head fake to the right while delivering a kick to the gut of the third coyote moving in on Jacob. The dance of circling and kicking at the beasts lasted for several minutes. In the end, Shadow suffered a bite to his thigh. Smoke had scratches on his neck, yet Jacob remained unharmed. As the coyotes disappeared into the forest, Jacob made note of the trail of blood covering their path. Nearing the prison, Jacob resolved to sell Smoke and Shadow together. The twins had never been apart, and he knew his selfish desire to keep one would hurt both. So he determined to do the right thing and let them stay together. As Scrooge and the ghost waited for Jacob to arrive, Marley asked his friend, "Ebenezer, do you have any idea what awaits you upon your passing?"
"Jacob, why do I feel your question is setting me up for trouble?"
The two looked at each other, then smiled.
"You are right. I have no honest reason for meddling," said Marley. No, I do not mind such a conversation. I just did not want to be shocked by the delivery of bad news," replied Scrooge.
Marley began the conversation.
"You know,
When I died, I opened my eyes from what I thought was a good night's sleep, then went about my day of getting dressed, going to work, and things of that nature. Why would you do that? It just seemed like a normal day. However, that did not last long. Soon things got very bizarre. I became aware of my chains. Then I realized my skin was translucent. Is that when you realized you had perished? Asked Scrooge. No, that became obvious when I was standing before Tient and Aperto. Who? You will meet them soon. I still don't know who they are. Tient tracks those that enter and leave the Isle of Transmography, said Marley. There's that word again. What, Tient? No, Transmography. I think I have been there, answered Scrooge. That is not possible. You still live. And yet, I'm sure I was there this very evening. You are still alive, right, Ebenezer? Last time I checked. Marley then repeated his original question. Ebenezer, do you have any idea what awaits you upon your passing? My best guess is everything you went through, but more. The young Jacob stood at the prison, waiting for Noah to arrive. Jacob had willingly become Noah's lifeline. Most days he brought the money and food that Noah needed to survive. On what felt like the coldest day in London's history, Noah finally arrived at the visitor's cage. His face showed signs of exhaustion. What have you done? Asked Jacob. As Noah shuffled his shackled feet, he replied, I watched a man get murdered. And what have you done, little brother? I just mean, why are you wearing leg irons? Because there has been a prison break. The turnkeys will do anything to make a pence. I do not understand, said Jacob. Let me just say, this prison is a money-making business, and every guard is on the take. So, how much money do you need today? Asked Jacob. All the pence you have got. Seriously? They will not take these shackles off until I pay for their release, explained Noah. Seriously? Stop saying that. Do you think I am misleading you? No, of course not, replied Jacob. With that, he gave his brother all of his pennies, 13 pence total. This is good, Jacob, thank you. Noah then asked, Have you found Sir Stephen Mackintosh yet? No, but I will. I am going to get you released from this prison, Noah, Jacob continued. My spirit will not be calm until I do. Noah looked at his brother out of the corner of his eye, then cautiously said, I appreciate that, then added, I do not understand your passion, but I am grateful for your devotion. The brothers spent as little time in the weather as was required for the exchange of funds and information. Once both had been transferred, they quickly moved toward their respective heated areas. January 4th started like the previous day, foggy and cold, but improved throughout the period. By the end of light, the fog had lifted, the cold lessened, and the third prisoner was returned to the day room. With the arrival of the last escaped prisoner, the remaining inmates began to pound the table and shout, Remove the chains! Throughout the building, prisoners screamed to be released from their ankle bondages. At first, in hopes of quieting the mob, the turnkeys yelled threats of torture. Eventually, when nothing silenced the group, the warden decided to remove the shackles from the prisoners who could pay the liberation fee. Noah offered to help his friends pay their fees. Offended by the suggestion, Henry stormed, "I have my own money." Both Joseph and Martha acted like they wanted Noah's money, but neither took it. Dee, being without a penny, took him up on the offer. Once freed from their chains, Dee began to rub her healing ointment on the abrasions the shackles had created. All 5 of the friends cooed as her soothing touch alleviated their pain. As for Dee, her sigh of relief was so loud it drew the entire room's focus. Near the end of the day, most prisoners began to feel feisty. Usually, the group just bought grog and then got drunk. However, both Maxie and Simons relieved their pent-up energy by relieving their bladders out the window. As they later explained to the turnkey, they were conducting an experiment as to whether their pee would freeze before it hit the street. It did, but the man being subjected to the frozen urine still howled as he passed beneath the falling ice. Though it was a disgusting thing to do, neither man experienced any punishment. The next morning, Noah, as usual, shuffled into the day room, one prisoner behind another. Over time, he had hardened to the institution's method. Days began to run into each other as the acclamation toughened into perseverance. Each day, Jacob brought coins. Most days, Flora brought love. Between the two, Noah survived. On Friday the 7th, Jacob arrived at the visitor's cage with good news. "I have found the money," he announced. Wide-eyed, Noah replied, "That is outstanding." He then promised Jacob, "I will build you a stable if you can resolve this loss for me." Jacob rejected the thought. "No, I do not want a reward. If I can free you from this abuse, my reward will be your freedom." Noah was overcome with emotion. "How do I deserve such a brother?" Jacob just grinned. For the remainder of the day, Noah flaunted a smile, yet the next morning would bring him a new panic. The morning introduced the day with a change to the routine. Martha was already waiting in the day room. As the men entered, each noticed her standing next to the open fire, but thought little of it. Only Maxie understood the reason for her early appearance, and he attacked her for it.
"You may think you're going to be released, but not before I first get mine."
Shoving her against the fireplace, he said,
"I am not going to pay for a leftover seducer."
"I do not perform for free," she said, attempting to slip beneath his hold.
"We will see about that."
Maxie growled as he intensified his attack. Noah, though alarmed by the assault, expressed nothing that would display his newcomer status. "Leave her," he yelled. Without flinching, Maxie grabbed Martha's breast, then forced a kiss on her. Noah, in the same moment, wrapped his arms around Maxie's chest, then pulled with such a force that Maxie dropped to the floor. Instinctively, Martha kicked her assailant in the head, which stunned the criminal, but did not stop him. However, Maxie was no longer interested in Martha. Slowly, he rose to his feet, turned toward Noah, and then with tremendous strength slammed a 7-inch sliver of wood into the would-be hero's side. As Maxie withdrew his hand, the room watched as Noah spurted blood. He was fortunate, for his greatcoat stopped the fragmented piece of wood from causing serious injury. As Maxie exited the area, he whispered to Noah,
"I am going to make sure the hangman uses a short rope on you."
With the help of his friends, Noah was promptly repaired. Dee, who had just entered the room, used another of her ointments to protect the wound, while Martha ripped her petticoat into strips for bandages. Toward the end of the day, Martha gained her release from Newgate. Before she left the prison, she hugged all of her new friends. As Martha embraced Noah, she whispered into his ear,
"Do not tell your wife about this. It'll only worry her without resolution."
Then, without warning, she kissed Noah with such intensity it pushed him off balance. As he stumbled to regain his footing, she left. The next morning, both Noah and Jacob arrived early at the visitor's cage. Once they completed their daily exchange, Jacob immediately left. Noah continued to walk circles around the courtyard. Thoughts of the summer's sun filled Noah's mind as his body made every effort to control its shivers. As he moved toward the prison's entrance, a voice could be heard calling his name. Turning around, he noticed Flora waiting at the visitor's cage. Noah burst into a huge grin as he ran toward her. Upon arrival, Flora showed half a smile to Noah. He studied her face, then asked, "What is wrong?" She looked down as she replied, "I'm all right." "Look at me, love." He lifted her chin so her eyes peered into his. "What is wrong?" "It's just me." She turned to walk away, but Noah stopped her movement. "If you leave me now, I will suffer worry all day over you." She looked Noah straight in the eyes, then whispered, "I think I am with child." Marley immediately fell to his knees and cried, "No, no, this truth is too difficult." "Jacob, why is this such a concern?" asked Scrooge. "Ebenezer, you know the same as I of this tragedy, and yet I had no idea that Noah was ever told about the baby. One more victim. How can I ever redeem myself?" The question was more than rhetorical for Marley. He now feared that nothing he did would ever right his wrong. The loss of so many blameless spirits, and now a child. Bloody hell, Marley hated himself. For a long moment, Noah stood motionless. He wondered what his response should be. Joy overpowered his fear when he reassured Flora. "This is going to be all right. Jacob has found the lost money. Hopefully he can repair the situation before the trial. If he does, we will be stronger after this." Flora recoiled from Noah's tenderness. "Wishes will not make reality, Noah." Tears began to flow down her cheeks. As they reached her chin, Noah used his hand to wipe them dry. For what seemed to be an eternity, Noah stood silent. Words of encouragement faded, yet a story from the past sprang forth. "Do you remember the day we met?" he asked. "Yes, of course I do," she said. "You did not like me, did you? I thought you might be simple." Her smile increased Noah's desire to continue. He said, "Well, I was simple, simply captivated by your charm." Flora's smile widened as she remembered the incident. "You certainly made a fool of yourself." "You would not give me a glance. I had to do something," Noah replied. "So you acted like a clown on purpose?" "Have you not realized by now? I am a clown." Flora laughed. She knew Noah's silliness seldom appeared, but when it did, it was a joy. Together, they retold the story. "It was such a shock when you swept your hat across the pathway in that grand gesture of chivalry." "I was trying to be impressive." "So, the shower of grain was planned?" she asked. "I had no idea that when I made the grand gesture, the vast amount of wheat that would fly," Noah explained. "It went everywhere, but mostly on you." "That I planned too," he admitted. "So, let me get this straight. You wanted to impress me so much that you put a handful of wheat in your greatcoat's arm cuff." Noah nodded his head in agreement as Flora continued, "I could hardly believe it when you signaled for me to pass in front of you, and then the grain scattered everywhere." Together, they laughed. You know, Flora, I am excited about the baby. It is just a possibility. I will know for sure in a few weeks. As Flora handed Noah a couple of pennies, Simons attacked. You stole my clothes, he yelled, slamming Noah's head into the fence. As Simons pressed Noah's face between the bars, one of the homemade barbs, cut from the metal, scratched Noah's cheek. Flora screamed. Simons grabbed the pennies from Noah, then muttered, I don't know which of your pals knocked me out, but I'm gonna punish you. The odour from the criminal's body filled the area. His breath alone caused Noah to cough. I have a feeling you're gonna die today. No, Flora shouted. She reached through the bars, grabbed the thug's hair, then pulled with such a force most of the strands were liberated from the scalp. Simons hardly felt any discomfort. Flora's attack only resulted in him pressing Noah into the barbs of the cage with a savage anger. The pressure from the piercing spurs caused blood to flow over Noah's face. Get ready for God's hell, he said, pushing on Noah's head with all the power he possessed. No, howled Marley. The ghost reached into Simons's chest, grabbed his heart, then compressed the flesh. As the muscle of Simon's organ conformed to the shape of Marley's bones, Noah reached behind himself and grabbed Simon's hair. In an effort to free himself, he yanked the felon's head backward. The counterattack infuriated Simons to such an extent he intensified his assault. Marley squeezed until his grip closed tight upon the heart. As the three men struggled for control, Simons began to loosen his clutch. Then, with his free hand, he grabbed his chest. Crazed with madness, he cried out, What are you doing to me? Noah pulled free of Simons, but Marley did not release his seizure of the heart. As the would-be murderer staggered from the visitor's cage, Marley followed. Jacob, release him, commanded Scrooge. Confused, Marley replied, I don't think I can. Just pull away. Simons lurched to and fro in an effort to gain freedom from his pain. Help me, Ebenezer, cried Marley. Scrooge grabbed Marley and pulled, yet his energy went without reward. My hand is clamped too tight, shouted Marley. Frantic, the two made every effort to separate from Simons, but the criminal's heart itself clung tight to Marley's grip. He is going to die, said Flora. Without warning, Simons dropped to the ground. The fall pulled Marley's arm from his shoulder. Lying in the corridor, still attached to the heart, the individual bones of Marley's hand began to twitch. Then they all disappeared. As his arm replaced itself, he said, I think I killed him. You know Noah is going to be blamed for this, replied Scrooge. The guard, now aware of the fallen villain, raced to his aid. What have you done? Growled the turnkey. Noah turned to the guard, with blood flowing from the gash in his cheek. He said, Simons attacked me. He said he was going to kill Noah, said Flora. Showing the jailer the clump of hair still in her hand, she added, Nothing was going to stop him, not even pain. Well, it looks like something painful did stop him. The guard kneeled at Simon's side, then reported, He's still breathing. As he got to his feet, he said, So, if pulled hair would not end an attack, I wonder what did. He grabbed his chest, then just fell. The turnkey looked at the couple. I've been watching you, he told Noah. The guard then added, You are worthy of respect. This one, he paused, looking at Simon still motionless on the ground. He deserves. And without warning, the man kicked Simons in the head. The guard untied the banner from around his neck, then handed it to Noah. Here, my neck can suffer the cold today. Clean yourself up. Noah and Flora just stood there, shocked.
"Are you daft? You're bleeding all over yourself. Clean yourself up."
The guard grabbed Noah's hand, then placed the cloth within it. Noah accepted the handkerchief, as Flora said, "Your kindness will be rewarded." The turnkey looked at Flora, shook his head in disagreement, then said to Noah,
"Do you know my name?"
"No, sir."
"Keep it that way."
With that, the turnkey picked up the dropped pennies Simon had stolen from Noah, then left the three to settle their disagreement. Within a few minutes, Simons began to recover. While moaning, the dazed criminal grabbed his head with one hand, then rubbed the area of his heart with the other. Slowly, he recuperated to the point where he could rise to his feet. He stared at Noah and Flora as they watched him. Neither knew if the other would continue the assault. However, with caution, both sides retreated. Simons lined up in front of Noah for the return indoors. As the door opened, Noah grabbed Simon's collar, then stepped in front of him.
"Get your pence ready. Never again will I be last when you are available for payment of the toll."
Simons just sighed, then accepted his new position. Once inside, Dee administered several of her ointments to Noah's injury. "This stops the bleeding," she said, showing the contents to the group. "This one causes the skin to stitch together without a scar, and this one quiets the pain." "Are you a doctor?" asked Henry. "No, darling. I only have my salves. I leave doctoring to the men with knives," answered Dee.
"Well, Jacob, you seem to have the luck of an angel today,"
said Scrooge.
"So it seems. Some day I will learn to control my anger." No, you will not. Your anger was honourable. Control would have only resulted in Noah's demise," assured Scrooge.
Marley's face showed no emotion, but he knew that lived history could not be changed. Noah was not going to die that day.